The gunshot echoed through the dusty main street of Redemption Springs, a sound as common as the howling wind on the Colorado frontier in 1876. Penelope Rivers flinched at the noise, clutching her basket of supplies tighter to her chest as she hurried past the saloon. 3 months married, and already she regretted the day she'd said yes to Harold Winters, a man whose charm had evaporated faster than morning dew under the harsh western sun. "Penny," Harold's voice slurred behind her, making her quicken her pace. "Where you think you're going, woman?" Her heart pounded as his heavy footsteps closed the distance between them. Harold had been drinking since noon, which meant his fists would be looking for something or someone to connect with before nightfall. The bruise on her cheek from yesterday had barely faded. "I'm just heading home to start supper," she answered, not turning around. The street was filling with people finishing their day's business, but Penelope knew from experience that witnesses rarely meant protection. Harold grabbed her arm, spinning her around so violently that several items spilled from her basket. "You've been avoiding me all day," he accused, alcohol heavy on his breath. "No, Harold, I've been working. Mrs. Fletcher needed help with Don't Lie to Me." His face twisted with rage as he raised his hand to strike her. Penelope closed her eyes, bracing for the blow that never came. When she opened them again, she saw a large, weathered hand gripping her husband's wrist in midair. "Touch her again and you'll lose it," came a deep, steady voice that seemed to cut through the ambient noise of the street. Penelope turned to see a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a storm-washed sky. He wore dusty riding clothes and a worn leather hat that shadowed his features, but there was no mistaking the controlled strength in how he held Harold's arm immobile. "This ain't your business, stranger," Harold spat, trying unsuccessfully to yank his arm free. "I'm making it my business," the man replied evenly, still not releasing Harold's wrist. "Where I come from, men who hit women aren't considered men at all." The crowd that had gathered began to murmur. Penelope noticed Sheriff Davis watching from outside his office, making no move to intervene. She'd gone to him twice before about Harold's behavior, only to be told that a man had the right to discipline his wife as he saw fit. "You don't know who you're dealing with," Harold threatened, his free hand moving toward the knife he kept at his belt. In one fluid motion, the stranger twisted Harold's arm behind his back and pushed him face first into the dirt road. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he said quietly, a dangerous edge to his voice. "A coward who makes himself feel big by hurting those smaller than him." Harold cursed, his face pressed into the dust. When you get up, you're going to walk away," the stranger interrupted. "And you're going to stay away from your wife tonight. Tomorrow, when you're sober, you can think about whether you want to continue this conversation with me." He released Harold, who scrambled to his feet, red-faced with humiliation as onlookers stared. For a moment, it seemed Harold might try to fight, but something in the stranger's stance made him reconsider. With a final venomous glare at Penelope, he stormed off toward the saloon. The stranger knelt down and began collecting the items that had fallen from Penelope's basket. "Are you all right, madam?" he asked, handing her a small package of sugar. "Yes," she said automatically, then reconsidered. "No, but thank you for your help, Mr. O'Malley, Owen O'Malley." He handed her the last of her things. "I just rode into town. Didn't expect to get involved in a domestic dispute within the first hour." "Well, Mr. O'Malley, welcome to Redemption Springs," Penelope said with a bitter smile, "where men like my husband give the place its charm." Owen's expression remained serious. "Does he hurt you often?" The directness of his question startled her. Ladies in Redemption Springs didn't discuss such matters with strangers or with anyone, for that matter. But something about Owen O'Malley's straightforward concern broke through her practiced silence. "Often enough," she admitted quietly, "but I have nowhere else to go." Owen glanced in the direction Harold had disappeared. "Everyone has somewhere to go, Mrs. Winters." "Sometimes they just need help finding it. It's Mrs. Rivers," she corrected. "I kept my name, one of the few things I've managed to keep." She glanced around nervously, aware that people were watching them. "I should go. Harold will be even worse when he comes home if supper isn't ready." Owen nodded, but there was concern in his eyes. "If you need help, I'll be staying at the boarding house on Elm Street. Mrs. Abernathy's place. Penelope knew she should politely dismiss his offer and hurry home, but the thought of facing Harold later made her hesitate. "Why would you help a stranger, Mr. O'Malley?" His expression softened slightly. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life." With that, he tipped his hat and stepped back, allowing her to continue on her way. Penelope hurried home, her mind racing with thoughts she hadn't allowed herself to entertain in months. Thoughts of escape, of freedom, of a life without fear. Owen watched her go, troubled by the resignation he'd seen in her eyes. He'd come to Redemption Springs tracking rumors of work, with a cattle outfit headed north to Montana. He hadn't planned on staying more than a few days, just long enough to resupply and maybe enjoy a proper bed and hot meal before the long journey ahead. But now, watching Penelope Rivers disappear around a corner, he felt an unexpected reluctance to leave. Something about her quiet dignity in the face of such ugliness stirred memories of his own mother, who had endured similar treatment until consumption had finally taken her when Owen was 14. He turned toward the boarding house, grimly certain that his brief encounter with Harold Winters wasn't over. Men like that never let perceived insults go unanswered. Owen would need to watch his back and keep an eye out for Penelope Rivers. The sun was setting by the time Penelope finished preparing supper, her hands working mechanically while her mind replayed the afternoon's events. Owen O'Malley's intervention had been unexpected, almost unbelievable. In the 3 years she'd lived in Redemption Springs, first as a schoolteacher and then as Harold's wife, she'd grown accustomed to people looking away when trouble came. Her marriage had been a desperate gamble after the school board had dismissed her. Harold Winters, the local freight company owner, had courted her with pretty words and promises of security. At 25, with no family and dwindling funds, she'd accepted his proposal despite the rumors about his temper. The rumors, she discovered too late, had been understated. The door banged open, startling her from her thoughts. Harold stumbled in, reeking of whiskey and cigar smoke. His eyes, bloodshot and narrow, fixed on her immediately. "Got dinner ready for your cowboy hero too?" he sneered, lurching toward the table. Penelope kept her voice steady. "I don't know what you mean, Harold. Supper's just for us." He slammed his fist on the table, rattling the plates. "Don't play dumb with me. Saw you making eyes at that drifter. Whole town's talking about it." "He was just being kind," she said, setting down the pot of stew with trembling hands. "Nothing more." Harold grabbed her wrist, squeezing until she gasped in pain. "You think I don't know what women like you want, always looking for the next man, aren't you?" "That's not true," she protested, trying to pull away. "Please, Harold, you're hurting me." "I'll show you hurting," he growled, raising his hand again. Penelope twisted away, desperation giving her unusual speed. She backed toward the door, knowing she couldn't outrun him but unwilling to stand there and take another beating. "Where do you think you're going?" Harold demanded, advancing on her. "I need some air," she said, fumbling for the door handle behind her. Just let me step outside for a minute. So you can run to your cowboy." Harold lunged for her, but alcohol had made him clumsy. Penelope darted aside and he crashed into the wall. She used the moment to wrench open the door and flee into the twilight. Fear propelled her down the street, away from their small house at the edge of town. She had no destination in mind, only escape. The logical place to go would be Sheriff Davis, but she knew from experience he would only send her back home, perhaps with a lecture about wifely duties. The church was locked at this hour. The few friends she'd had before her marriage had distanced themselves as Harold's true nature became apparent. Without conscious decision, she found herself on Elm Street, standing before the modest 2-story boarding house run by Mrs. Abernathy. Lights glowed in the windows and the sound of quiet conversation drifted from inside. Penelope hesitated on the porch, suddenly uncertain. What was she doing? She couldn't involve a stranger in her troubles, no matter how kind he'd seemed. Before she could turn away, the door opened, spilling warm light onto the porch. Mrs. Abernathy, a plump woman in her 50s with graying hair tucked into a neat bun, stood in the doorway. "Penelope Rivers, what on earth are you doing standing out here in the dark?" she asked, then noticed Penelope's disheveled appearance and the red marks on her wrist. Her expression softened. "Oh, child, Come in, come in." Penelope allowed herself to be ushered inside, where several boarders were gathered in the parlor after dinner. Owen O'Malley sat near the fireplace, reading a newspaper. He looked up when she entered, immediately setting the paper aside and rising to his feet. "Mrs. Rivers," he said, concern evident in his voice, "is everything all right?" Before she could answer, the front door burst open and Harold stood there, rage distorting his features. "There you are, you faithless whore," he snarled, ignoring the gasps from the other boarders. "Didn't take you long to find your way to him, did it, Mr. Winters?" Mrs. Abernathy exclaimed. "This is a respectable establishment. I'll thank you to watch your language and leave my house immediately." Harold ignored her, focusing on Penelope with murderous intent. "You're coming home, now." "I don't think she is," Owen said quietly, stepping between them. Harold's hand went to the knife at his belt. "This time I'm ready for you, cowboy." What happened next occurred so quickly that Penelope could barely follow the movement. Harold lunged forward with his knife, but Owen sidestepped with a grace that belied his size. In the same motion, he caught Harold's arm, twisted it sharply, and the knife clattered to the floor. A cry of pain escaped Harold as Owen pinned him against the wall. "I warned you what would happen if you tried to hurt her again," Owen said, his voice dangerously soft. "Now I'm going to let you go and you're going to leave. If you ever come near Mrs. Rivers again, our next conversation won't be so civilized." For a long moment, no one in the room moved or spoke. Then Owen released Harold, who stumbled back, clutching his wrist. The look he gave Penelope made her blood run cold. "This isn't over," he promised, backing toward the door. "She's my wife and the law's on my side." After Harold stormed out, Mrs. Abernathy immediately took charge, sending one of the boarders to fetch Sheriff Davis and ushering Penelope to a chair near the fire. "You'll stay here tonight," she said firmly. "I've got an empty room upstairs. We can sort everything else out in the morning." Penelope looked around the room at the concerned faces of strangers and felt overwhelming gratitude mixed with shame. "I can't impose. It's no imposition," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted. "No one should have to live in fear, marriage vows or no." Owen remained standing by the door, as though expecting Harold to return. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his stance that suggested he was prepared for further trouble. Sheriff Davis arrived 15 minutes later, looking annoyed at being called away from his evening. He listened to Mrs. Abernathy's account with obvious impatience. "So let me understand," he said finally. "Mr. Winters came looking for his wife, who had run away from home, and Mr. O'Malley here interfered in a private domestic matter." "Harold threatened me with a knife," Penelope said, finding her voice. "This isn't the first time he's been violent," the sheriff sighed. "Mrs. Winters Rivers," she corrected automatically. "Mrs. Rivers, then, the law gives a husband certain rights." "If you've been neglecting your duties, her duty isn't to serve as a punching bag," Owen interrupted. His voice level but firm. Sheriff Davis turned to him with narrowed eyes. "You're new in town, Mr. O'Malley. I suggest you be careful about getting involved in matters that don't concern you." "When someone threatens violence in front of me, it concerns me," Owen replied evenly. "I've worked as a deputy in Montana Territory. I know the law doesn't protect a man's right to beat his wife, even out here." The sheriff's face reddened. "Are you presuming to tell me my job?" "I'm reminding you of it," Owen said. "Mrs. Rivers came here seeking safety. She has bruises that prove she's in danger. That should concern you as an officer of the law." The other boarders murmured in agreement, causing the sheriff to shift uncomfortably. Public opinion clearly wasn't on his side in this room. "Fine," he conceded grudgingly. "Mrs. Rivers can stay here tonight. I'll speak with Harold in the morning, tell him to cool off." He fixed Penelope with a stern look. "But you should know there's not much I can do legally. A wife belongs with her husband." After he left, Mrs. Abernathy showed Penelope to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Try to get some rest, dear," she said kindly. "Things often look clearer in the morning light." But as Penelope sat alone on the narrow bed, her future seemed anything but clear. Harold wouldn't forgive this public humiliation. If she returned home, his retribution would be severe. If she didn't, she had nowhere to go and no means to support herself. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, Owen O'Malley stood there, hat in hand. "I wanted to check that you're all right," he said, "and to apologize if I made things worse for you." Penelope shook her head. "You didn't." Harold would have found a reason to be angry regardless. That's just who he is. She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for standing up for me. Not many would have. More should," he said simply. He seemed about to say more, then thought better of it. "Try to get some sleep, Mrs. Rivers. If you need anything, I'm just down the hall." After he left, Penelope lay awake for hours, listening to every creak and sound from outside, half expecting Harold to appear. When sleep finally came, it was fitful and filled with dreams of running from shadows that always caught her in the end. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through thin curtains. For a moment, Penelope was disoriented, then remembered the events of the previous day with a rush of anxiety. She dressed quickly in the same clothes she'd worn yesterday, smoothing out the wrinkles as best she could. When she went downstairs, she found most of the boarders had already left for their daily business. Mrs. Abernathy was in the kitchen, preparing biscuits for the late risers. "There you are, dear," she said warmly. "Sit down and have some breakfast. You look like you could use it." Penelope obeyed, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. "Has there been any word from Harold?" Mrs. Abernathy's expression darkened. "Not directly. But Joe Henderson came by earlier. He runs the livery stable, you know, and said Harold was at Barton's saloon most of the night, making threats against that nice Mr. O'Malley." She placed a cup of coffee in front of Penelope. "Speaking of whom, he asked me to tell you he's gone to speak with Mr. Caldwell at the bank. Something about your situation." Penelope nearly spilled her coffee. "The bank? Why would he?" The front door opened and Owen entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. He spotted Penelope and came to join her at the table. "Mrs. Rivers," he greeted her, "I hope you managed to get some rest." "Some," she admitted. "Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you went to see Mr. Caldwell." Owen nodded. "I did. I wanted to understand your options." He glanced at Mrs. Abernathy, who tactfully busied herself at the stove, giving them a semblance of privacy. "I know it's not my place to interfere, but I've seen situations like yours before. Without resources, it's difficult to escape." Penelope felt a flicker of hope mixed with suspicion. "And what did you learn?" "That your marriage contract included a separate property agreement. The money you earned as a teacher before your marriage remains yours legally, held in trust at the bank. Mr. Caldwell confirmed Harold can't access it without your signature." Penelope stared at him in astonishment. "How did you know about that?" "I didn't," Owen admitted, "but it's a common precaution for women with their own means, especially teachers. I took a chance that you might have been advised to protect yourself." "My father's lawyer suggested it," she said slowly. "I'd almost forgotten." "Harold was so angry when he discovered he couldn't touch that money, but it's not much, just my savings from 2 years of teaching." "It might be enough to get you to Denver," Owen suggested. "You could start fresh there." The possibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Leave Redemption Springs, just like that? Why not? What's keeping you here besides fear?" Before she could answer, the door banged open again. Sheriff Davis entered, his expression grim. "Mrs. Rivers," he said without preamble, "you need to come with me." Owen stood immediately. "What's happened?" The sheriff hesitated, then sighed heavily. "Harold Winters was found dead this morning behind Barton's saloon, knife wound to the chest." Penelope felt the room spin around her. "Dead? But how?" "That's what I aim to find out," the sheriff said. "And since you were heard publicly quarreling with him yesterday, and you ran away from home the same night he was killed, I need to ask you some questions." "You can't seriously believe Mrs. Rivers had anything to do with this," Owen protested. "She was here all night." "Everyone in this boarding house can confirm that." "Maybe so," the sheriff conceded. "But there's also the matter of you threatening him in front of witnesses, O'Malley, so you'll both be coming to my office. Now." The sheriff's office was a small, austere building with 2 holding cells in the back. Penelope sat rigidly in a wooden chair, still trying to process the news of Harold's death. Beside her, Owen maintained a calm demeanor, but she noticed the tension in his jaw. Sheriff Davis settled behind his desk, regarding them both with suspicion. "Let's start with your whereabouts last night after the confrontation at Mrs. Abernathy's." "I was at the boarding house all night," Penelope said. Mrs. Abernathy gave me a room upstairs, and you, O'Malley, the same. I returned to my room after checking on Mrs. Rivers' safety and didn't leave until morning. The sheriff made a non-committal noise. Can anyone verify that you stayed in your room all night? The floors at Mrs. Abernathy's creak like old bones, Owen replied evenly. Anyone moving around after hours would have been heard by the other boarders. Convenient, the sheriff muttered. He turned his attention back to Penelope. Mrs. Rivers, did your husband have any enemies that you know of? Anyone who might have wanted to harm him? Penelope hesitated. The truthful answer was that Harold had antagonized many people with his bullying and dishonest business practices. But naming names felt like a betrayal, even of a man who had caused her so much pain. Harold could be difficult, she said carefully. He had disagreements with several people in town. Business matters, mostly. Anyone specific come to mind? The sheriff pressed. Before she could answer, the door opened and a young deputy entered, looking anxious. Sheriff, you might want to come see this. We found something in the alley. Sheriff Davis rose. Wait here, he instructed, following the deputy out. As soon as they were alone, Owen turned to Penelope. Are you all right? She shook her head, fighting back tears. I don't know what I am, shocked, confused. She looked at him directly. Did you have anything to do with this, Mr. O'Malley? His eyes held her steadily. No, I meant what I said about losing my temper with men like Harold, but I'm not a murderer. Something in his straightforward gaze reassured her. I believe you, she said quietly. But if you didn't and I didn't, then who did? The door opened again, and Sheriff Davis returned holding a blood-stained knife and a handkerchief. Recognize this, Mrs. Rivers? Penelope felt the blood drain from her face. That looks like Harold's hunting knife, the one he always carried. Found it wrapped in a bandana and stuffed behind a rain barrel, the sheriff said. Appears your husband might have been killed with his own weapon. That suggests a struggle, Owen pointed out, or someone who knew him well enough to take the knife from him. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You seem to know a lot about murder for a passing cowboy. I told you I worked as a deputy in Montana, Owen replied calmly. I've investigated deaths before. Sheriff Davis set the knife on his desk. Well, you're not investigating this one. In fact, until I sort this out, neither of you is leaving town. He looked at Penelope. Mrs. Rivers, you're free to go for now, but stay at the boarding house where I can find you, and don't try to access that bank account Mr. O'Malley was so helpfully inquiring about this morning. Penelope felt a chill at his words. You think I had my husband killed for money? I think it's mighty convenient that you suddenly have access to funds and freedom on the same day your husband turns up dead, the sheriff replied bluntly. As for you, O'Malley, I'd like you to stick around a bit longer. Understanding his implication, Penelope rose to her feet. Mr. O'Malley had nothing to do with Harold's death. You're making a mistake. Let's hope I am, the sheriff said, for both your sakes. Outside, Penelope found herself trembling, partly from shock and partly from an unexpected sense of relief that brought immediate guilt. Harold was dead. She was free of his cruelty forever, but at what cost, and to whom? She walked slowly back to the boarding house, aware of the stares and whispers from townspeople. News traveled fast in Redemption Springs. By nightfall, everyone would know that Harold Winters was dead and his wife was a suspect. At the boarding house, Mrs. Abernathy greeted her with concern. They're saying terrible things in town, she said, ushering Penelope inside, about you and Mr. O'Malley plotting together. It's not true, Penelope said wearily. Neither of us had anything to do with Harold's death. Of course not, Mrs. Abernathy agreed loyally. But people will talk, especially with Mr. O'Malley being a stranger and stepping in to defend you so publicly. Penelope sank into a chair. Is the sheriff still questioning him? I believe so. Mrs. Abernathy hesitated. There's something else you should know. Mr. Barton came by while you were gone. He said Harold was in his saloon last night, drinking heavily and getting into arguments with several men. Apparently, he lost a significant amount of money playing poker with Jeremiah Quinn. Penelope's head snapped up. Quinn, the cattle buyer, Mrs. Abernathy nodded. The very one. Mr. Barton said they nearly came to blows over accusations of cheating. Harold left around midnight, promising to settle the score. This new information gave Penelope a flicker of hope. Did you tell Sheriff Davis this? I sent word, but you know how he is. Once he's fixed on an idea, it takes dynamite to shift him. The afternoon dragged on with no word from the sheriff's office. Penelope found herself pacing the parlor, jumping at every sound from outside. When the door finally opened around dusk, she turned expectantly, only to be confronted by Jeremiah Quinn himself. Quinn was a large man with a prosperous belly and small, calculating eyes. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing thinning hair slicked back with pomade. "Mrs. Rivers," he said, his tone overly sympathetic. "I came to offer my condolences on your tragic loss." Something about his manner put Penelope on guard. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I understand you may have been one of the last people to see my husband alive." Quinn's smile faltered slightly. "Yes, we had a friendly game of cards, nothing serious." "That's not what Mr. Barton says," she replied evenly. "He mentioned an argument over cheating." Quinn's expression hardened. "Barton should mind his own business, and so should you, Mrs. Rivers." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "In fact, I came to offer you some advice as well as my condolences. This situation could become very unpleasant for you." "What do you mean?" "I mean that a widow under suspicion might find herself in dire straits. No friends, no resources." He smiled again, showing too many teeth. "But I've always admired your resilience. Perhaps we could come to an arrangement that would benefit us both." Penelope felt a cold understanding wash over her. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Quinn?" "Not at all," he said smoothly. "Simply pointing out that I have influence in this town. Influence that could either help or hinder the sheriff's investigation." Before Penelope could respond, the door opened again and Owen O'Malley entered. His expression darkened when he saw Quinn. "Everything all right here, Mrs. Rivers?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the cattle buyer. Quinn stepped back, replacing his hat. "Just paying my respects. We can continue our discussion another time, Mrs. Rivers." With a curt nod to Owen, he departed. As soon as he was gone, Penelope let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "The sheriff released you," she observed, trying to hide her relief. "Reluctantly," Owen confirmed. "He couldn't hold me without evidence, and several people at Barton's confirmed I wasn't there last night." He glanced toward the door Quinn had just exited. What did Quinn want? Penelope recounted the conversation, including what Mrs. Abernathy had told her about the poker game. "I think he was trying to intimidate me," she concluded. "But why?" Owen's expression was grim. "Quinn has a reputation that follows him." In Montana, he was suspected of running a cattle rustling operation, though nothing was ever proven. If Harold caught him cheating and threatened to expose him. "You think Quinn killed Harold?" Penelope asked, the pieces starting to fit together. "I think it's more likely than you or me having done it," Owen said. "But proving it won't be easy, especially if Quinn has the influence he claims." Penelope sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I just want this to be over. I want to leave this town and never look back." Owen sat beside her. "You still can. Once this is cleared up, if it's cleared up," she interrupted. "Sheriff Davis seems determined to blame one of us. Then we'll have to help him see reason," Owen said with quiet determination. "Starting with what we know about Quinn." Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Penelope remained at the boarding house, enduring the whispers and stares whenever she ventured out. Owen, meanwhile, began asking questions around town, carefully gathering information about the night of Harold's death. He discovered that Quinn had left Barton's saloon shortly after Harold, claiming he was headed to his room at the hotel. But 2 witnesses reported seeing him walking in the direction of the alley behind the saloon instead. More significantly, Quinn had paid off a substantial gambling debt the very morning Harold's body was found, using cash that he had claimed not to have the night before. When Owen took this information to Sheriff Davis, however, he was met with skepticism. "Quinn's a respected businessman," the sheriff argued. "You're a drifter with a convenient story that shifts suspicion away from yourself and Mrs. Rivers." "Check his alibi," Owen insisted. "Talk to the hotel clerk about when Quinn actually returned that night." "I'll conduct my investigation as I see fit," Sheriff Davis replied stiffly. "And I suggest you stop poking around before you find yourself in one of my cells." Frustrated, Owen returned to the boarding house to find Penelope sitting on the porch, watching the sunset with a pensive expression. No luck, she asked as he took the seat beside her. The sheriff is being stubborn, Owen admitted, but I'm not giving up. Penelope studied him thoughtfully. Why are you doing all this, Mr. O'Malley? You could have ridden out days ago, left all this trouble behind. Owen was silent for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. When I was a boy, he finally said, my father was a lot like your husband, quick with his fists, especially when he'd been drinking. My mother took it for years, believing she had no choice. What happened? A stranger passed through our town one day. A horse trader, I think. He saw my father raising his hand to my mother in the street and stepped in, much like I did with Harold. But this man did more than just stop the beating. He helped my mother see that she had options, that she could leave. He even gave her money for train tickets. Did she go? Owen nodded. We left that night, started over in Montana with nothing but a few belongings we could carry. It wasn't easy, but we were free. His expression softened with the memory. That stranger changed our lives with a simple act of kindness. I've never forgotten it. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. So you're paying it forward. Trying to, he said with a small smile, though I seem to have complicated your life rather than simplified it. No, she said firmly. You showed me I don't have to accept cruelty as my fate. Whatever happens with this investigation, I'll never regret that lesson. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, each lost in thought. The next morning brought unexpected news. Jeremiah Quinn had departed Redemption Springs before dawn, supposedly on urgent business in Denver. He's running, Owen said when he heard the news. He knows we're asking questions. Penelope felt a surge of anger. So he gets away with murder while we remain under suspicion? Not necessarily, Owen said thoughtfully. His flight might convince Sheriff Davis to look more closely at him as a suspect. Indeed, Quinn's abrupt departure raised eyebrows throughout town. By midday, Sheriff Davis appeared at the boarding house looking distinctly uncomfortable. There have been some developments, he announced without preamble. It seems Mr. Quinn left town rather suddenly this morning without settling his hotel bill. And the hotel clerk confirms he didn't return to his room until well after 1 in the morning the night Harold died. That contradicts his statement to you, Owen pointed out. The sheriff nodded grudgingly. It does, and we've found something else. One of Barton's bartenders remembered Quinn washing his hands at the pump behind the saloon around the time Harold must have been killed. He cleared his throat. In light of these developments, I'm no longer considering either of you primary suspects in Harold Winter's death. Relief flooded Penelope. Are you going after Quinn? I've sent telegrams to Denver and other stops along the line, the sheriff confirmed, but Quinn has a head start and connections in many places. He looked directly at Penelope. I owe you an apology, Mrs. Rivers. I let personal feelings cloud my judgment. After he left, Penelope turned to Owen with wide eyes. I can hardly believe it. It's over. The investigation into your involvement is, he said cautiously. Whether they catch Quinn is another matter. I don't care about that, she admitted. I just want to move on with my life. The following week brought a flurry of activity. With Harold's death officially ruled a murder committed by Jeremiah Quinn, still at large, Penelope was legally entitled to inherit her husband's property. To everyone's surprise, she immediately put the house up for sale and began making arrangements to leave Redemption Springs. You're really going to Denver? Mrs. Abernathy asked as she helped Penelope pack the few personal belongings she wanted to keep. Yes, Penelope confirmed. I've written to an old school friend who teaches there. She says they're always looking for qualified teachers. We'll miss you, the older woman said sincerely, though I understand why you need to leave. What Penelope didn't mention was that each day spent in Redemption Springs was a reminder of Harold's cruelty and her own powerlessness. Even with him gone, the whispers continued, some still suggesting she had somehow orchestrated his death. The one bright spot had been her deepening friendship with Owen O'Malley. He had remained in town, ostensibly waiting for the cattle drive he'd originally come for, but Penelope suspected he stayed partly to ensure her safety until Quinn was caught. They had fallen into a comfortable routine, taking evening walks together and sharing meals at the boarding house. Penelope found herself looking forward to these times, drawn to Owen's quiet strength and integrity. For his part, Owen seemed content in her company, though he maintained a respectful distance that suggested he viewed their relationship as strictly friendship. The day before her planned departure, Penelope visited the bank to finalize her affairs. Between her teaching savings and the proceeds from selling Harold's house and business, she would have enough to start fresh in Denver with a comfortable cushion. As she left the bank, she spotted Owen waiting across the street, leaning against a hitching post with the easy grace that had first caught her attention. "Thought you might like company walking back," he said as she approached. "I would," she replied with a smile. "Everything's settled at the bank. The stage leaves tomorrow at noon." Owen nodded, his expression unreadable. "Denver will be lucky to have you teaching their children." They walked in silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders. When they reached the edge of town, Owen stopped suddenly. "I have something to ask you, Penelope," he said, the use of her first name sending an unexpected thrill through her. "Something I've been thinking about for days." "What is it?" she asked, her heart suddenly racing. Owen looked directly into her eyes, his gaze steady and serious. "I'm not staying in Redemption Springs after you leave. There's nothing for me here." "Where will you go?" she asked, trying to ignore the disappointment his words caused. "That depends on you," he said quietly. "I've been offered work on a ranch outside Denver. Good work with fair pay and the chance to eventually buy a stake in the operation." Hope flickered within her. "Denver, yes," he confirmed, "and I was wondering. That is, I was hoping you might allow me to call on you properly once we're both settled there." Penelope felt warmth spreading through her chest. "Call on me." Owen took a deep breath. "I care for you, Penelope, more than I expected to care for anyone when I rode into this town. But I understand if it's too soon after everything you've been through." "It's not too soon," she interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. "When I think about starting over in Denver, the only thing that makes it less frightening is the thought of having you nearby." Relief and joy transformed his features. "I don't want to rush you," he said earnestly. "We can take all the time you need." Penelope smiled, feeling truly happy for the first time in months. "We'll have plenty of time in Denver." 2 months later, Penelope stood at the window of her small but comfortable apartment in Denver, watching snow fall gently on the bustling street below. Her position at the Denver Ladies Academy had proven ideal, challenging work with bright students and colleagues who respected her abilities. The knock at her door brought a smile to her face. Owen was precisely on time, as always. When she opened the door, he stood there with snowflakes melting in his dark hair, holding a small bouquet of winter flowers. "For the most beautiful teacher in Denver," he said, presenting them with a smile that still made her heart skip. "Flatterer," she teased, accepting the flowers and inviting him inside. "How was work today?" "Good," he replied, removing his coat. "Mr. Patterson is pleased with the improvements to the south pasture. Says I have a natural eye for the land." Their courtship had progressed steadily over the past weeks, each date confirming what they had begun to feel in Redemption Springs. Owen was everything Harold wasn't: kind, considerate, and unfailingly respectful of her independence. "I have news," she said as they settled at her small dining table for the meal she'd prepared. "I received a letter from Mrs. Abernathy today. How is she?" "Well. But the interesting part is about Jeremiah Quinn." Penelope unfolded the letter. "He was caught in Santa Fe trying to sell stolen cattle. When they arrested him, he apparently confessed to several crimes, including Harold's murder." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "Does that bring you closure?" "I think it does," she said after a moment's consideration. "Not that I mourned Harold exactly, but knowing with certainty what happened that night helps me put it behind me completely." After dinner, they sat together on her small sofa, talking about their plans and dreams. As the evening grew late, Owen took her hand in his. "Penelope," he said softly, "these past months have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she admitted, leaning slightly against his shoulder. "I know it may seem soon," he continued, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "but I've never been more certain of anything." He shifted to face her directly. "I love you, Penelope Rivers. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing up to Harold in that dusty street." Penelope felt tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "I love you too, Owen. You showed me what love is supposed to be: supportive, kind, equal." Owen reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Then would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need my protection or support, but because we choose each other, freely and completely." When he opened the box, a simple gold ring with a small pearl gleamed in the lamplight, nothing ostentatious but perfect in its elegance. "Yes," Penelope whispered, her heart full to bursting. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen O'Malley." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a violent confrontation in a frontier town to this quiet declaration of love in Denver, it seemed both improbable and somehow inevitable. They were married in the spring, in a small ceremony attended by a few new friends from Denver and Mrs. Abernathy, who traveled all the way from Redemption Springs for the occasion. The ranch where Owen worked provided them with a cozy cabin on the property, allowing Penelope to continue teaching while Owen worked toward his goal of owning part of the operation. 2 years later, as they sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching their infant daughter sleep in Penelope's arms, Owen reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. "If I hadn't ridden into Redemption Springs that day, or if I'd minded my own business when I saw Harold threatening you." Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then I wouldn't be sitting here with the two people I love most in the world." "Do you ever regret leaving your teaching position?" Owen asked. Since little Emma's birth, Penelope had put her career on hold, though she still tutored occasionally. "Not for a moment," she assured him. "I'll return to it someday when Emma's older, but this time with her is precious." She smiled up at him. "Besides, with your recent promotion to foreman and the owner talking about retirement, we have plenty to keep us busy." Indeed, Mr. Patterson had recently hinted that he was considering selling the ranch in the next few years, with Owen as his preferred buyer if he could raise the funds. It was an ambitious goal, but one they were working toward together, saving every extra penny. "I was thinking," Owen said, stroking Emma's downy head gently, "about that day in Redemption Springs, when I caught Harold's hand. What about it? I keep wondering what made me intervene. I'd seen plenty of ugly behavior on the frontier before, but something about you, your dignity in the face of his cruelty, made it impossible to walk away." He kissed her forehead. "Best decision I ever made. For both of us," Penelope agreed softly. As the sun set over the Colorado foothills, casting long shadows across their land, Penelope reflected on how far she had come from that frightened woman in Redemption Springs. She had found not just safety but joy, not just escape but purpose. And it had all begun with a stranger's outstretched hand, catching a blow meant for her and changing the course of both their lives forever. The years passed, marked by the steady growth of their family and their dreams. Emma was joined by a brother, Michael, and later by another sister, Sarah. The children thrived in the open spaces of the ranch, which Owen and Penelope eventually purchased from Mr. Patterson when he retired to live with his daughter in California. Penelope returned to teaching as the children grew older, establishing a small school on the ranch for their children and those of the ranch hands. Her reputation as an educator spread throughout the region, and she eventually wrote a series of reading primers that were adopted by schools across Colorado. Owen's natural talent for ranching transformed their property into one of the most prosperous in the area. Under his management, they weathered the economic ups and downs that plagued many ranchers, always finding innovative ways to adapt and survive. Their marriage remained a partnership in the truest sense, each supporting the other's ambitions while building a life that neither could have imagined when they first met in that dusty street in Redemption Springs. The memory of that day of Harold's raised hand and Owen's intervention became part of family lore, a story their children requested often, especially as they grew old enough to understand its significance. "Tell us again about how you met Papa," 10-year-old Emma would ask, her eyes bright with anticipation, and Penelope would smile at Owen across the dinner table, their gazes meeting in shared remembrance. "It was a hot afternoon in Redemption Springs," she would begin. and a brave cowboy saw something wrong and decided to make it right. In their later years, as grandchildren gathered at their feet and Gray touched their hair, Owen and Penelope often reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them together. From a moment of violence had sprung decades of love, proving that even in the harshest circumstances, courage and compassion could change everything. "I never regretted it," Owen said on their 40th anniversary, as they sat on the same porch where they had once rocked their babies. "Not for a single day." "Regretted what?" Penelope asked, though she knew the answer. "Catching Harold's hand that day," he replied, taking her weathered hand in his. "Even if it had cost me everything else, I'd have done it again." Penelope smiled, the years having only deepened her love for this man who had shown her what real strength looked like. "It didn't cost you anything," she reminded him. "It gave you everything." "It gave us everything," he corrected gently, leaning in to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. And as the sun set on another day of their shared life, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that real love, wasn't found in control or fear, but in those brave moments when someone chooses to stand between harm and the vulnerable, not counting the cost. Owen had made that choice for a stranger all those years ago, never knowing it would lead to a lifetime of happiness neither of them had dared to dream possible.